Talk 1600. You're catching the drift. Conservative talk, intelligent conversations on local, state, and national issues with Gary Wellings, chief editor of the Current newspaper and Current Online. Join in the conversation at 734-822-1600. And now, your host, Gary Wellings.
And good Saturday afternoon. Thanks for tuning in to catch our drift. Joining me in studio, Ipsy Ed Bonderenka.
Welcome. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. It's the first show. We would have had Tim Wahlberg today, Congressman Tim, but he had plans and said, can I call in next week? So I'll have him in next week.
I'm going to wish him a happy 2019 because the year won't be so new then.
Maybe I'll have some good news for us.
Yeah.
So, anyways, what we do on The Drift every Saturday is go over the news that we put on thedailydrift.com. It's
the news you need to know.
Yeah, and you can find that information at thedailydrift.com. And if you want to email me something for The Daily Drift, or if you want to email, you don't feel like calling into the show today or any Saturday, you can always email me, Gary, at thedailydrift.com. And let's take care of our sponsor this week, AAA Service Network. Now, furnaces have been running a little bit. Up and down. It's actually been a pretty decent winter, but my furnace is still running. And if you're worried about, have you had a furnace checkup, don't wait until it goes out. Call in AAA Service Network, get a furnace checkup, or your water softeners or sump pump repairs, whatever, before spring gets here. You want to do all those things. There's some great coupons in the Current, COURANTonline.com if you don't get the hard copy in your mail. But there's all kinds of coupons in the Current newspaper, and it's always on the back page, so you can see that from AAA Service Network. You can reach them at 734-864-4340. That's 734-864-4340. Or you can go to online, AAAServiceNetwork.com. That's AAAServiceNetwork.com. Ed's a great guy. Go out and see him.
They do generators. You got to think about that in the winter.
Yeah.
Do you want that furnace to keep running? Better provide electricity to the blower motor.
Yeah, that's one of my dreams, right, in the next year or two is to save up enough money that I can do the whole house generator for emergencies because I got a lot of trees in my neighborhood and the electricity could go out anytime.
It doesn't depend on your neighborhood either. It could
right.
Be somebody,
it could be a mile away, 2 miles away.
Yeah.
You're right.
But like that picture in New York, the alien invasion that they were trying to pass
the
off
Transformers?
as a transformer. Yeah, like a transformer is going to glow that long. Yeah.
Directed energy weapons! I'm like, all right, come on, man. It's something not. It's not an alien.
It was aliens. It's obvious.
Okay, well, we're going to certainly talk a lot to talk about this week, including our good friend Mitt Romney. But before we do that, we broached a subject a few weeks ago, and I think it kind of pertains to what we have going on recently in the news, which is this global elite society. Something is
the plot to
you can
take
call
the
me
White House.
tinfoil gear if you want. There is a plot of elites in this world to do something bad to the rest of us, and that is they want to control every aspect of our lives. And they're already wealthy, so it must be just the power they want, right?
It's control. Yeah.
It's control,
yeah.
right? So we're going to talk a little bit about Smedley Butler, and you've been doing your research, and we discussed him a little bit with L. Todd Wood when he called in the other day and kind of broached this. I'm hoping
Jimmy from Manchester knew who he was.
Yeah. So why don't you give the background to Smedley Butler, and then if anyone wants to call in, love to have your calls and talk about it.
Well, like tinfoil hat Gary was saying, Smedley Butler, he was a Marine general. I've mentioned that before, and I'm going to quote you out of Wikipedia. He was the highest rank authorized at the time, a major general, and at the time of his death, the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. He died in 1940 of pancreatic cancer, they think. And during his 34-year career as a Marine, he participated in military actions in the Philippines, China, Central America, and the Caribbean during the Banana Wars, and France in World War I. And Butler later became an outspoken critic of U.S. wars and their consequences. So he came up with this speech. It's called War is a Racket. And we mentioned that before. And the closing words of his War is a Racket speech that he said after he retired was, I helped purify Nicaragua. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the American sugar interests. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies. That's the Banana Wars. Okay? And the quote is, looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was operate his racket in 3 districts, and I operated on 3 continents. Now, it went on. Smedley Butler was probably the most popular military veteran at the time in the 30s. he was extremely well known, and he was a proponent of what was called the veterans.
He would be like Mattis today, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
probably even more so, because the guy. Well,
There were more veterans back then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he was a 2-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner. Okay, 2 times. And there's other stuff that he was popular for. He had a lot of loyalty of his men. A lot of people knew of him. He was a great leader. There's a story of these officers one of them was being asked, "Why did you do that?" He led them into battle, which was actually he was at the Boxer Rebellion in 55 Days in Peking. He was there. And that's where he got one of his congressional medals. And they were interviewing one of his officers. Says, "Why did you do that?" "Well, because he asked me to." That's a leader. You know what I mean? They do absolutely crazy stuff. You don't even think about it because the guy that's leading you trust him that much. But it went on to where he retired, and this boneless army marched on Washington wanting the veterans bonus from World War I. They want it paid early. It was supposed to be paid in 1945. They wanted it paid early because it's the Depression, and they need money. So they marched on Washington. They camped there, and the government didn't want to give them the bonus, so they wanted to move, and that was FDR, and they wanted to postpone it until 1945. And so they actually had MacArthur lead the troops with Patton to push all these veterans out of Washington at bayonet and gunpoint, if you can imagine. But Butler was not having any of that. He had retired. So he had spoken for this bonus. It was very big on his mind that these guys get this bonus. He was speaking all the country. So obviously the veterans really liked him and appreciated for it. There's a point to this story. Because some interests approached General Smedley Butler. A guy approached him and said, "We'd like you to address the American Legion Convention this year." Must be, I think, 1934. And he says, "Why is that?" He says, "Well, we want you to make a speech, and then we want you to propose that America stay on the gold standard," because Roosevelt was talking about taking us off the gold standard. And their approach, he says, "Why do I care?" And they said, "Well, because if we go off the gold standard, the veterans' bonus will be devalued by inflation. And by 1945, it'll be worthless. So it is a veterans' interest issue." What I didn't know until I read these articles was that the American Legion was founded by industrialists and bankers. And it was used, this is what I've read, okay? I wasn't there. But it was used by these interests to break strikes and to oppose communist rallies. So if there was a strike, somebody might go into the local American Legion Hall and they'd say, "Hey, there's these commie strike breakers down there, and guys have finished their beers and go down there with baseball bats and break it up." So the American Legion, the ruling class of the American Legion, was a bunch of guys that were put in position. They were called the royal family of the American Legion at the time. And this is where the Veterans of Foreign Wars came from, kind of a response to the American Legion. It was more of a grassroots organization, I'm given to understand. So Smedley Butler was supposed to go and speak there, and also it was proposed that he would go into the leadership of the American Legion. So I think he made the speech. I can't remember. That's not important or not. Later he was approached by this same guy again. And the guy says, we want you to get together a bunch of veterans for an organization because we want to protect President Roosevelt. And what it turned out was these guys had watched what Hitler had done in Germany and Mussolini had done in Italy. And he had made the government, both those guys being fascists, had brought the government into close cooperation with industry. Now, they weren't the bad guys that we know them to be today, okay? Mussolini and Hitler, they were making Time magazine. They were extremely powerful. Industrialists looked at them and said, we like that. They made the trains run on time, right? Now you got a depression, and these guys, these industrialists, they don't like FDR because of his New Deal and all the money that he wants to spend on the New Deal to make America a socialist country, in order to bring us out of the Depression. If he'd have followed standard economic policy, we'd have been out of the Depression a lot sooner. A lot of people don't realize that. Even one of his chief finance guy in 38 said something to the effect of, I don't understand. We've tried everything. We have tried everything and nothing's worked. I think this guy's named Morgenthau. But back to what we're talking about. They were worried. These rich guys were worried about inflation and FDR's taking us off the gold standard. And one guy spoke, and we're talking about DuPont's. We're talking about who owned Remington firearms and gunpowders and armaments. We're talking about Brown Brothers. We're talking about a lot of investment bankers and Wall Street. These people all had an interest in this, and they wanted to see FDR shoved aside and have a industry-friendly guy come in and run the country, and FDR would be set aside as a figurehead president. And so as a figurehead, he'd just be able to cut ribbons and sign documents and stuff. But this guy, this, say, fascist leader, a Secretary of the Interior, maybe something like that, he would actually be doing the day-to-day running of the country and the administration. He'd be more business-friendly, and he'd keep us on the gold standard. So these wealthy guys, one guy approached Smedley Butler and said, look, I have $30 million. That's my money. He says, I'd spend $15 million of it on this campaign just to keep the other $15 million so I don't lose everything. Because Smedley was asking, where do you get all this money from? Why are you willing to spend all this money? They wanted him to lead a veterans organization, a grassroots march on Washington, demanding their approach to replacing FDR. And I thought this sounded so far-fetched to me. You know, I'd never heard about it in the history books.
Right.
And it turns out that there's sealed testimony. This one book I read, The Plot to Seize the White House, describes it all. And you can find that online, PDFs of it, the plot. If you go to my blog, there's a very clean PDF I made of it. It's Ed Bonderenka Blogspot, or I forget the name of my blog of all things. But if you look for Ed Bonderenka.
So the industrialists were obviously scared of communism, and so they were kind of willing to go fascist, centralized.
A lot of people felt that FDR was a communist.
Right.
That he was
Alger Hiss was a communist.
Well,
right?
exactly.
He worked for him. How many? There was a ton of communists that worked for FDR. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's just a fact.
If you watch the movie The Nuremberg Trials, Nuremberg, okay? If you watch that, and that was made in like 1960 and 1958 or so, the Richard Widmark character, an American colonel, he's referred to by the one of the other characters as, he's one of those Reds that worked for FDR. You know, so it was known. I mean, that was popular knowledge that you don't hear about today.
So that group of industrialists, is that like the beginning of what we now call the military-industrial complex? Is that what that was? So those guys, that's still here. They're still in power behind the scenes,
and they're embedded with Wall Street too.
With Wall Street, and frankly, they now, if you ask me, I look at that and compare that to all these people that want to keep fighting around the world, Syria, Afghanistan.
Yep.
They're making money from the war.
They used to be called merchants of death.
And I guess they still are in a way. What I did find, which brings it around this week, did you see when Lindsey Graham, who came out against Trump very harshly, saying we shouldn't be pulling out of Syria, that's a huge mistake. He had lunch with Trump. Trump told him things, and he came out and said, he told me things I did not know about, and I feel a lot more comfortable pulling out. So is that? Does it go to what Thomas Wichter has been saying, that the Saudis, maybe the Israelis, whatever, the Qataris, the UAEs, are all behind the scenes, have their people in place in Syria? Are they working for or with? Is there a political solution coming together of some sort that the rest of us don't really know about? Well,
remember the Democrats that didn't want us over there now want us to stay there.
Is that crazy? Did you want to talk about flip-flopping? These Democrats are, folks, they do not belong in power. And why we were so apathetic to allow the Democrats to take the House back. You have Maxine Waters now in charge of finance, Nancy Pelosi in charge as the Speaker of the House. What did you do to yourselves, America? Adam Schiff now in charge of oversight? For crying out loud, they've already introduced articles of impeachment. It's just crazy.
Well, and that's part of it. This was a plot to seize the White House. So it's not unreasonable that there is a plot to seize the White House right